For years, Google has stood as an undisputed titan of the digital age, its search engine a global gateway to information, its advertising network a ubiquitous economic engine. Yet, this very dominance has drawn the relentless gaze of regulators and antitrust enforcers worldwide. From Washington, D.C. to Brussels, legal challenges have mounted, accusing the tech giant of leveraging its power to stifle competition. The narrative around Google has shifted from innovation darling to a subject of intense scrutiny, forcing the company to pivot from passive defense to a more assertive counter-strategy. The question is, what finally pushed Google to fight back, and what does that fight entail? Google's market position, particularly in search, is staggering. According to StatCounter Global Stats, Google's search engine has consistently held over 90% of the global market share for more than a decade. In the mobile operating system market, Android commands an estimated 70% share worldwide, as reported by Counterpoint Research in early 2024. This extensive reach extends into advertising, with eMarketer data from 2023 indicating Google's substantial slice of the digital ad revenue pie. Such pervasive influence, while a testament to product success, also forms the core of antitrust complaints, alleging Google's ability to dictate terms across multiple digital ecosystems. The sheer volume of legal actions against Google has become undeniable. In the United States, the Department of Justice, alongside numerous state attorneys general, has filed multiple antitrust lawsuits, targeting Google's search business and its advertising technology. Across the Atlantic, the European Commission has a long history of investigations, culminating in billions of euros in fines. Beyond these major players, countries like India, South Korea, and Australia have also launched their own inquiries and imposed significant penalties. This global regulatory pincer movement indicates a coordinated, albeit independent, effort to address what many perceive as anti-competitive behavior. The U.S. Department of Justice has been particularly vocal regarding Google's alleged market abuses. Assistant Attorney General Jonathan Kanter, head of the DOJ's Antitrust Division, stated in court filings that Google has maintained its monopoly through exclusionary agreements that shut out competitors. These agreements, he elaborated, reportedly include multi-billion-dollar deals with smartphone manufacturers and browser developers to ensure Google search remains the default option. Critics argue this practice entrenches Google's dominance, making it exceedingly difficult for rival search engines to gain a foothold, regardless of their innovation or user experience. The European Union has a track record of imposing substantial penalties on Google. Since 2017, the European Commission has issued over €8 billion in antitrust fines across 3 distinct cases. These include penalties for anti-competitive practices related to Google Shopping, restrictions on Android device manufacturers, and abuse of its ad brokering dominance. While Google has challenged these rulings, some have been upheld. For instance, the General Court of the EU affirmed a significant portion of the Android fine in 2022. This financial pressure, alongside forced operational changes, demonstrates the EU's persistent efforts to curb Google's market power. A particularly fierce battleground has emerged around Google's Play Store and its in-app payment policies. The most prominent challenger, Epic Games, creator of Fortnite, sued Google and Apple alleging that the mandatory 15 to 30% commission on digital purchases and restrictions on alternative payment systems constituted an illegal monopoly. While Apple largely prevailed in its case against Epic, Google's situation took a different turn. The ongoing legal struggle forced Google to defend its ecosystem model, arguing that its Play Store fees fund critical investments in security, platform development, and user acquisition, a common defense among App Store operators. Historically, Google's defense against antitrust claims often hinged on several core arguments. First, it maintained that its products are free, arguing that consumers benefit directly from their offerings, such as search and Android, without direct payment. Second, the company emphasized user choice, stating that users are free to switch browsers, search engines, or mobile operating systems if they prefer. Third, Google highlighted intense competition from other tech giants like Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft, asserting that its market share is constantly challenged. Lastly, they frequently cited innovation, positioning their practices as necessary to fund the research and development that drives technological progress. At the heart of the U.S. Department of Justice's court case against Google is the accusation of maintaining an illegal monopoly in the search market. The DOJ claims Google achieved this dominance through restrictive contracts with device makers and wireless carriers, ensuring its search engine and associated services, like Chrome browser, are pre-installed and set as default. According to the DOJ, these deals create an insurmountable barrier for potential competitors, denying them the scale needed to innovate and challenge Google effectively. Google, however, contends these are legitimate business agreements reflecting the quality and popularity of its products. Following years of mounting legal and regulatory pressure, industry observers noted a discernible shift in Google's approach. Rather than solely defending its existing practices, the company began to proactively announce policy changes and offer concessions, especially in Europe and more recently in the US. This shift suggests Google recognized that its traditional defenses were no longer sufficient in the face of increasingly assertive regulators and a public growing skeptical of big tech's power. It marked a move from simply refuting claims to actively shaping the narrative and attempting to preempt further regulatory action with voluntary adjustments. A pivotal moment arrived in December 2023 when a jury sided with Epic Games in its antitrust lawsuit against Google regarding the Play Store. This verdict, a significant blow to Google, found that the company possessed monopoly power in the Android app distribution market and illegally stifled competition. The decision stands in stark contrast to Epic's loss against Apple and signaled a potential shift in how courts view App Store ecosystems. While Google stated its intention to appeal, the immediate aftermath saw the company begin to implement changes, including allowing developers to use third-party billing systems, a clear move to fight back by adapting to legal realities. The Epic Games verdict highlighted significant differences in how Apple and Google operate their app stores, and how they are perceived legally. Previously, both Apple's App Store and Google's Play Store broadly mandated their own payment systems for in-app purchases, charging a 15 to 30% commission. Post-verdict, Google is now required to allow third-party billing options for developers in the US, effectively unbundling its payment processing from app distribution. Apple, on the other hand, largely maintained its walled garden approach after its own legal battles, though it has faced pressure for changes in specific markets like the EU. This comparison illustrates varied regulatory outcomes. The costs associated with Google's numerous legal skirmishes are substantial, extending beyond the headline-grabbing fines. Public financial disclosures indicate that Google's parent company, Alphabet, has spent hundreds of millions of dollars annually on legal fees, lobbying, and compliance initiatives related to antitrust. For example, estimates by investment firms suggest potential legal costs and future revenue adjustments could impact Alphabet's valuation by billions of dollars over time. While not catastrophic for a company of Google's scale, these expenses represent a significant diversion of resources that could otherwise be directed towards product development or shareholder returns. The cumulative financial burden is a clear motivator for Google's revised defensive strategies. Beyond search and app stores, Google's advertising technology business has also come under intense fire. The U.S. Department of Justice, along with several states, filed a lawsuit accusing Google of monopolizing the ad tech industry. The allegations center on Google's control over nearly every step of the digital ad delivery process, from the publisher's ad server to the advertiser's demand-side platform. Critics claim Google uses its dominant positions to manipulate ad auctions, suppress competition, and ultimately increase its own profits at the expense of publishers and advertisers. Google asserts its ad tech tools are effective, competitive, and provide value to all parties. The pressure on Google isn't solely judicial. Legislative bodies globally are also pushing for new regulatory frameworks. In the U.S., proposals like the American Innovation and Choice Online Act sought to limit tech giants' ability to favor their own products on their platforms. While these specific bills have stalled, the underlying sentiment for greater regulation persists. In Europe, the Digital Markets Act, DMA, and Digital Services Act, DSA, have already been enacted, imposing stringent new rules on gatekeeper platforms like Google, compelling them to open up their services and ensure fair competition. These legislative efforts aim to fundamentally restructure the digital economy. In response to this multi-front assault, Google has initiated several changes across its product portfolio. In Europe, under the Digital Markets Act, Google has had to make significant adjustments to how its search results display, offering more prominent choices for alternative search engines and map services. Developers are gaining more flexibility in Android, with new options for third-party app stores and payment systems. These moves, while often framed as enhancements for users or developers, are largely seen by analysts as direct responses to regulatory mandates, showcasing Google's fight back through strategic compliance and adaptation. Google frequently defends its overall business model by positioning itself as a champion of the open web. Kent Walker, Google's president of global affairs, has often articulated this view, stating, "Our products are built on open technologies and foster innovation across the internet." The company argues that its core services, like Chrome and Android, while proprietary in some aspects, contribute to an open ecosystem that benefits developers and users by driving interoperability and preventing fragmentation. Critics, however, argue that Google's interpretation of open often serves to reinforce its own dominant position, rather than truly decentralize power. Financial markets and tech analysts have shown mixed reactions to Google's ongoing legal battles and its evolving defense. While some analysts at firms like J.P. Morgan and Morgan Stanley acknowledge the potential for increased regulatory costs and operational changes, they often maintain an overweight rating on Alphabet stock, citing the company's robust core business and strong cash flow. Others, like those at Needham & Company, express greater concern over the long-term impact on Google's profitability and innovation capacity, particularly if forced divestitures or significant business model changes are mandated. The consensus remains that Google's fundamentals are strong, but regulatory headwinds are a persistent, material risk. Google's competitors, predictably, welcome the increased regulatory scrutiny. Companies like DuckDuckGo, a privacy-focused search engine, have long argued that Google's default arrangements and algorithmic bias stifle their growth. Similarly, smaller ad tech players, such as The Trade Desk, have publicly supported antitrust actions, claiming Google's control over the ad ecosystem creates an unfair playing field. These companies often provide testimony and data to regulators, portraying Google's concessions not as voluntary improvements, but as overdue corrections forced by competitive pressure and legal action. Their voices are critical in shaping the regulatory agenda. Despite Google's recent legal adaptations, many significant questions remain unresolved. The U.S. DOJ's landmark search monopoly trial continues, with potential remedies, including structural changes, still on the table. The outcome of Google's appeal against the Epic Games verdict will be closely watched, as it could redefine App Store economics globally. Furthermore, the implementation of Europe's Digital Markets Act is still in its early stages, and its full impact on Google's business model is yet to be seen. The regulatory landscape for big tech is far from settled, indicating a prolonged period of legal challenges and evolving business practices. Google's fight back is a complex balancing act. On one side, the company must defend its highly successful business model and the shareholder value it has created. On the other, it faces increasing demands to ensure fair competition and prevent the perceived abuse of its market power. For Google, compliance with diverse global regulations means adapting products and policies without sacrificing the innovation that has defined its success. For regulators, the challenge is to foster competition and protect consumers without stifling technological progress. The tension between these objectives defines this ongoing era for big tech. What began as sporadic antitrust concerns has evolved into a global, coordinated challenge to Google's very architecture. The company's shift from largely reactive defense to proactive policy adjustments marks a new chapter in the history of big tech. The Epic Games verdict, the ongoing DOJ trials, and the rigorous implementation of EU legislation collectively paint a picture of a tech giant forced to adapt. Whether these changes will fundamentally alter the digital landscape, foster genuine competition, or merely represent cosmetic adjustments, remains an open question. One thing is clear: Google is fighting back, and the fight is far from over.